Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
This podcast is made possible by you, the supporters of WPLN and WNXP, Nashville Public Radio.
This is the Nash Villager podcast. It's February 11th, 2025. Last night, Governor Bill Lee delivered his State of the State address, and we'll have coverage of that in this episode's newscast. But first, a look back to the action of one of Lee's predecessors, Governor Robert Love Taylor. Because it was on this day in 1897 that Taylor did something you might find quite surprising. He signed into law an all-out ban on selling cigarettes in this state. I'm Nina Cardona, and this is your daily digest of what's happening around Middle Tennessee from Nashville Public Radio, WPLN News. If you've had your eyes open at all at a Tennessee gas station or drugstore, you know that cigarette ban did not have staying power. But I was honestly shocked to learn that there ever was one, especially given that tobacco was well established as one of the state's major cash crops by the time the ban was enacted. But to folks back in the late 19th century, smoking cigarettes was seen as far more dangerous than the more traditional forms of tobacco use, like smoking pipes or chewing plugs of the dried leaves. It seems they felt on just a gut level that fully inhaling smoke was not a good idea. There were rumors going around that the paper used to roll cigarettes was dangerous. There also seemed to have been some concerns that other substances could be inserted into the cigarettes along with the tobacco, and consumers wouldn't know what they were getting. Now, I haven't been able to find out exactly what they thought cigarettes did to the body. It would be a little while longer before scientists identified the connection between smoking and lung cancer. But one telling nickname folks were using for cigarettes at that time was coffin nails. They definitely saw that there was some kind of connection between them and death, thus the ban. But then a man in Monroe County took the state to court over the law. The case went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the decision, handed down in 1899, determined that Tennessee's ban got in the way of interstate commerce laws. So the ban went away. And before too long, cigarettes became normalized, to the point that my grandmother was even told by a doctor in the 1960s that she should take up smoking. It was essentially prescribed as a way to calm her nerves. And now we have all kinds of rules restricting where you can smoke them. In other words, the pendulum has swung back and forth and back again. Now, one thing those back and forth changes make super clear is that each generation is just doing the best they can with the information at hand, but that information can change really drastically. And right now, health officials are pointing out that the same kind of thing is going on with e-cigarettes. When they were new, people made a lot of initial assumptions that turned out to be wrong. Last week, Tennessee's health commissioner talked about the topic in a legislative hearing. As WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney told us, Dr. Ralph Alvarado basically said vaping is killing Tennesseans. He echoed things we've been hearing from other health leaders, saying that actually e-cigs are not a step down from regular cigarettes. They are not a safer option. They are just as dangerous and cause many of the same potentially deadly problems in the body. And in fact, some research suggests that sucking vapor into your lungs is actually even more harmful than smoking in some ways. But some things never seem to change. Back in the 19th century, when people were very worried about the newfangled cigarettes, one of the concerns was that they were especially attractive to teenagers. And unsurprisingly, Dr. Alvarado was particularly vocal last week about his concern that a new generation of young people is getting addicted to something that can kill them, with e-cigarettes, with vaping. The latest data shows that 1 in every 5 Tennessee teenagers has a vaping habit. In just a few minutes, who should or can be held responsible for the trash that ends up in Tennessee landfills? That's coming up after the newscast.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr and Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.
Thematic Static on WNXP is the mixtape we make together. A themed set loosely organized by you, the listener, handpicking songs according to a theme. Airing first Thursdays at 9 a.m. and again Saturdays at 9 a.m., Thematic Static plucks your requests from the socials at WNXP Nashville and by voice memo at 615-320-9100. Thematic Static, the mixtape we make together, supported by United Record Pressing, only on WNXP.
Here's the latest from WPLN News. Tennessee's growth is essential to its future, but what happens when it puts the state's natural beauty at risk? WPLN's Miriam reports that problem was at the heart of Governor Bill Lee's State of the State address last night.
How do you balance growing infrastructure needs with conservation efforts?
You start by rejecting conventional wisdom that says that you cannot do both. To grow Tennessee, we have to conserve Tennessee.
Lee points to the Duck River in Middle Tennessee. It's one of the most biodiverse rivers in the nation and one of the most endangered as more people rely on it for drinking water and as more developers pollute it. Lee's solution is a $100 million initiative to help ease the use of the river. Lee's other solutions include no-interest loans on construction for single-family homes, multi-million-dollar investments in nuclear energy, and grants to help preserve the state's farmland. Mariana Bacallao, WPLN News.
In addition to laying out next steps for his administration, Lee also used the State of the State address to tout the results of a special session last month. Lee gained State House approval for his years-long push to bring school vouchers statewide and his plan for immigration enforcement. When Lee mentioned support for removing, quote, dangerous criminals from Tennessee's communities, a member of the crowd shouted, "Immigrants belong here." Outside the House chamber where Lee delivered his speech, protesters could be heard chanting critiques of the governor's school voucher and immigration legislation. Tennessee offers its driver's license tests in English and Spanish, as well as Korean, Japanese, and German, but that could change once again. 2 Republican lawmakers are proposing the tests be offered in only English. Representative Kip Capley presented a similar bill last year, but it was held back in the Senate. This time, Capley and Senator Bo Watson think they have a better chance. Advocates say the challenge is not in the road tests, but having to answer questions about general road laws. They say some people get lucky and pass, but that doesn't mean they understand the questions. The proposal also bans the use of translation dictionaries and interpreters to assist in the written test. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, says it will now enter schools, churches, and hospitals to arrest undocumented immigrants. WPLN's Char Daston visited a South Nashville health center that's creating a safe and welcoming place for immigrant patients, even as they prepare for this new reality.
It's just after 9 in the morning, and Siloam Health in Melrose is already buzzing with activity. A chatty receptionist greets patients in English and Spanish. The busy central office area is lined with flags from dozens of countries.
We wanted our patients to feel celebrated when they walk in.
That's Katie Richards, the CEO. She says the clinic's demographics reflect Nashville's large and growing immigrant communities.
6,500 patients each year from more than 80 countries.
Siloam maintains a team of specialists, translators, and religious advisors on site, many of whom are volunteers. Amy Richardson leads this team. She says President Trump's promise of mass deportations has affected patients' day-to-day lives.
So we are hearing patients who don't want to come in for particularly their preventative care appointments, patients afraid to leave their house to go to the grocery store.
It's affecting some physically.
Some of our providers are reporting an increase in headaches, backaches, other stress-related issues.
Reducing this stress means correcting misinformation these patients are hearing. But the CEO, Richards, says staff are also conducting drills, practicing what they'll do if ICE agents show up.
If they're going to our patients and talking to them, we want to make sure that we then come alongside them so that our patients know their rights. We also know that ICE officers are not allowed beyond public spaces. So as far as they could get without a warrant would be our waiting room.
Yet morale at the clinic is still high. Richards thinks that's partly because Siloam is faith-based.
Christ's priorities was caring for the poor, caring for the marginalized, loving people when they feel afraid.
Char Daston, WPLN News.
The Trump administration is working to slash funding dramatically for science research across the country. WPLN's health reporter Catherine Sweeney explains how this would affect Tennessee.
Tennessee gets around $700 million a year in grants from the National Institutes of Health. The money goes to universities, hospitals, and biomedical companies. It helps pay for more than 9,000 jobs across the state, and that's not just professors and grad students. Here are some of the projects. St. Jude is looking for ways to improve kids' cancer care in low-resource hospitals. Vanderbilt wants better care for Medicare Advantage members with advanced illnesses. Meharry Medical College has a lab to keep the school and surrounding medical providers up to date on the newest HIV treatments. And UT is trying to help Alzheimer's patients with cancer manage their pain. The cuts would nearly eliminate money for indirect costs, things like electric bills, building maintenance, IT, and janitorial services. The money also helps universities stay afloat. And we're talking current projects too, not just future ones. If the cuts go through, it can mean massive layoffs and potentially the end of some of these projects. 22 states have sued to block the cuts, pointing out only Congress has the power to change this. Catherine Sweeney, WPLN News.
On Monday, a federal court hit the pause button on these NIH funding cuts, but only in the states that sued. The Trump administration refused to comply with similar orders, so it's unclear whether it will obey this one. The Trump administration's federal hiring freeze could make for some very visible differences at the Great Smoky Mountains National Park this summer, from dirty bathrooms to overgrown trails. The park relies on 140 temporary employees during peak season. Hiring for those positions usually takes place at this time of year. Without those seasonal workers, officials say they'll have difficulty performing basic maintenance. And the Tennessean reports it could also interfere with educational programming run by full-time rangers who'll have to refocus their duties. Trouble at the park could have an economic impact on the surrounding communities. Great Smoky Mountains is the most visited national park in the nation. Last year, it tallied just over 12 million visitors. A former Metro fire captain has won his free speech lawsuit against the city. A federal jury awarded $1.7 million in damages to the man who was demoted for posting demeaning comments on social media. It addressed people who protested police brutality and the killing of George Floyd. Last year, Metro Council voted unanimously against a legal settlement that would have cost the city $105,000. At the time, council members said it was important to take a stand and make it clear they would not support employees who disparage community members. The Tennessean reports Metro Legal is weighing options for next steps. You'll find more news anytime at WPLN.org. Tennessee sends $150 million in recyclables to landfills each year. At the same time, landfills across the state are running out of space. With WUOT in Knoxville, Pierce Gentry reports on the new legislation that's trying to improve both problems at the same time.
Trucks of all shapes and sizes are constantly coming and going from Middle Point Landfill outside of Murfreesboro. It's one of Tennessee's biggest landfills and takes in more than 1,000 tons of waste every day from Nashville and surrounding areas. But unless something changes, it's slated to close in just 4 years. Its director, Mike Klassen, says that's when it will run out of room.
Time is of the essence here, certainly in Rutherford County, but really in Middle Tennessee more broadly, to really figure out a solution to our disposal capacity crisis.
And Middle Point isn't the only site facing closure. More than half of the active landfills in the state will reach capacity in 20 years or less. When that happens, the local communities that rely on them will be forced to ship their garbage elsewhere.
But if you don't have a landfill and you have to ship that waste, 90, 100, 120 miles away, the cost to those businesses, which will then be passed on to consumers, is astronomical.
If more materials were recycled, it could help increase the life of landfills like Middle Point. Democratic State Senator Heidi Campbell of Davidson County sponsors the Tennessee Waste to Jobs Act, a business-focused approach to extended producer responsibility, or EPR, a concept that's been widely used in Europe since the 1990s.
What's different about this is that we're trying to do this in a red state. And so we're trying to basically find a creative way that works for a red state by actually centering business.
By charging businesses a small fee per sold item based on package size and material, the state can encourage waste reduction and fund recycling infrastructure through a new nonprofit. Then, recycling and reselling those materials back to producers creates a system where everyone benefits. Gary Cohen is an EPR advocate who's been meeting with legislators across the state. He uses M&Ms as an example.
And I say, okay, this is a bag of M&Ms, and the M&Ms are packaged in packaging. So what this bill does is it will transfer the cost of recycling this material and this packaging from the taxpayer to M&Ms, to Mars. And by the way, Mars is behind our bill, and they want their packaging back.
Cohen says that companies such as Mars, Unilever, Nestle, and Danone already support the law. More recycling provides businesses with more affordable, sustainable materials for production.
We have plastic manufacturers who want the yogurt containers, and we're throwing away 88%, 90% of our plastic into the landfill, but these guys could use it to make paint cans.
But it's not without opponents. According to Campbell, they're meeting resistance from 3 distinct groups.
It's coming from the bottlers, the haulers, and the grocers.
The bottlers, companies like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, argue they already pay an almost 2% tax in the state on bottled drink sales. The Beverage Association of Tennessee, which represents bottlers in the state, declined to comment when contacted about this issue. If passed, Tennessee would be the first Republican-majority state to enact EPR legislation. Its fate remains uncertain, but both Campbell and Cohen remain optimistic. I'm Pierce Gentry, WUOT News.
This story was produced as part of the Appalachia Mid-South Newsroom. It's a collaboration between NPR and public radio stations in West Virginia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. And we do this roundup of Nashville news every weekday. Please consider subscribing on your favorite podcasting app. Thanks so much to all of you who've left 5 stars, a thumbs up, or a review in your app of choice. A little bit of love really does tell the algorithms that more people should hear about us. And of course, everything at WPLN News is listener supported. You can make a donation at WPLN.org. And that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening. Let's make this day a good one, and we'll catch back up tomorrow.
Funding for the Nash Villager podcast comes from Burr & Foreman Law Firm, serving clients with transactional, litigation, and regulatory needs. Discovering how each client defines a win and working with them every step of the way to achieve it. Burr.com.